Hello, good afternoon.
Hello.
All right. So I'm here on time. I wasn't going to fuck this up twice in a row. And I haven't done my study yet for today, so I have a hankering for making some artwork today. So we got everything set to have a good stream. I'm hoping everybody is in a good mood and looking forward to this because I absolutely am. What do we got today? Oh, this is an interesting one. This might be really good. Let me screen share so you can see what I'm looking at.
Just a warning, there have been some bot issues today, so there might be random people trying to come on asking about those.
Okay.
You're
Bodish. You know what? I forgot to talk about this on my other stream, but I had a scam attempt this morning. I had like a really bad scam attempt this morning, as in like, not that it was like, it was really sophisticated. It was the most sophisticated scam attempt that I've had in a long time. And thankfully, I know a little bit about a thing or two, and I didn't get hit. So what they did is there was somebody who contacted me and said, "Hey, we would like to have you on our podcast, a thing that people have asked me to do in the past, and we want to pay you $2,000 to be there." And at first, I thought I misread it because typically the way that like sort of scammy podcasts work is that they try to charge you for appearing on their podcast. And in this case, I was thinking like, okay, well, this person's just going to be begging. Like they're going to say, "Hey, do you want to be on our podcast?" And then they're going to say, "Hey, and also it's only going to cost you $600 to be on our podcast," which is like completely lame. But no, they're like saying, "Hey, we want to pay you $2,000 to appear on this podcast with a bodybuilder," which makes like about 0 cents. If like anyone who would really, really want me to be on their podcast, probably not someone who's best known for like athletics. Like the last podcast I did was actually kind of interesting. It was somebody who is a working comedian who had pivoted to like creativity and spirituality, and like it was actually kind of it was actually a really fun episode. But yeah, a bodybuilder wanting me on to talk about like without a specific agenda was like a totally weird thing. And so I was curious about where the turn was that was going to like take me. It was going to try to take my stuff. So they're like, "Okay, well, have you ever done a podcast on Facebook before?" And of course the answer is no, because you don't do podcasts on Facebook. So I'm like, "Yeah, no." Like, so like, "Okay, we'll just get on a Zoom call and we'll set you up." And so they get me on the Zoom call and they're like, "Oh, and we want you to be on a Zoom call uh, on your PC or laptop. We don't want you doing it on the phone." And I was like, because like, there's a lot of really sketchy links that people will try to get you to click on when they're scamming you. And it's harder for them to execute stuff on the phone than it is on PC. So I try to connect. If there's ever any questions, I try to connect via my phone. So I did that. And the guy's screen sharing me the back end of like business.facebook.com, which is the sort of business back end of Facebook. And he was telling me, "Oh, this is totally normal stuff. You see, this is where you do the podcast." I was like, "This is where I buy ads. This is the business manager. I have an account on here. This is where my ad guy buys ads for me." And he's like, and also everything. We actually do everything on here, including podcasts. And like, I think that the play was that they were going to try to create a fake user called Online Events, give it a certain amount of permissions for my business. Then I was going to accept to include it as part of my business structure, which would allow them to be able to purchase scam ads using my business's account and broadcast it to my audience. It involved them having to like get me on phone calls, go back and forth on email, put up this whole front involving the social media accounts of some fitness influencer that was never involved. It was a whole huge elaborate thing. And then as soon as I was like telling them like, "Hey, I just wanted to get on the call to figure out where the turn was," they immediately hung up. So I was like, awesome. That's how I started my day to day, getting in there on the scans. And so, by the way, I'm Pete Mohrbacher. I'm an artist. I do digital art full time. I do it mostly the old fashioned manual way. And today I'm going to be doing an art study. Most working days, I do a quick study, somewhere between an hour to 2 hours, where I take a photo and I reproduce it in Photoshop using my pen tablet here, and yeah, and like it's a way of creating a kind of artistic workout that helps me stay in shape and learn new skills. I didn't do them for a really long time, but I've been starting to do them over the last couple of months, and it's been a fantastic experience. And it's a perfect opportunity for me to be able to hang out and talk to you about art and work on art at the same time, because it's the kind of thing that I can, tune in and like kind of do automatically while I'm talking, something I'm not doing right now. But yeah, I'm gonna get to it. I'm going to figure out. I was thinking about trying out some new techniques. I'm trying to use this as a bed to be able to figure out different workflows, because there's such low stakes when it comes to working on these studies that I can try out a lot of different things and see what works for me. It's a good bed for experiment. And what I recommend for you guys, if you're interested in learning to do art the old-fashioned way, that this can be a good way of kind of getting your feet under you and like learn about where all the tools are and get a feeling for this kind of stuff. What I recommend is that you pull up Pinterest, grab a nice fashion portrait or something, or a landscape, and pull it up in your Photoshop here, or your Krita, or your Clip Studio Paint, GIMP, like whatever you like, and yeah, work on it on a window alongside, and try to reproduce the image from left to right. When you do that, you're going to find that it's really, really tough to be able to reproduce the image the way that it looks. Even though you have the cheat sheet right here, you're going to find that your eye has a really hard time figuring out exactly where all this stuff fits together. And having to work your brain to make all that stuff come together is going to make you have to learn things in order to be able to reproduce it. Typically, I'm doing something a little bit more zoomed in, so a lot of this kind of structure is really easy to pin down. But because we're doing a full figure here, got this tiny, tiny little head inside this huge composition here, and I'm having a little bit of a tough time placing it off the bat. But I'm going to try to lay down some blocks of value first, some big, broad shapes, and then I'm going to try to maybe cut them down and reshape them a little bit until I can find my way into it. Because trying to pick the specific size and location of like little shapes like the shoulder and the neckline and the head floating disembodied inside this whole huge canvas, it's just not working out as I'm trying to do it. So I'm gonna try to like block things in more broadly here and start from big to small and see if I can get a slightly better result like that. Right away, I can see how oversized I've made this head. So we're just going to erase that out. My layers right now are set up really simple. The background is just a simple ground color that I've set up a light gray to make it easy on the eyes, so I'm not getting blasted in the face by pure white. And then I've got a new layer on top of it that I'm painting kind of semi-transparent to try to find, to try to like lay down a simple base coat to find where all of these features are. Get myself going here. Then once I'm like really far along with this thing and I'm feeling pretty comfortable with it, I will be available to take questions. If you guys have art questions or questions about having scammers in your DMs every day and like whatever you want to know about, I am here to answer whatever I can. Try to make this time interesting and educational, and hopefully maybe even a little fun. Look at this. Now I'm finding it. Now I feel like I'm seeing stuff. The goal is not to make the marks. The goal is ultimately to see. Trying to see sounds easy. Easy to look. It's hard to see. I want to get too specific about this like little window here where the abs are showing through. I don't want to get too specific about anything. I just want to start to feel like I'm finding my way. I had some ideas on like new techniques I wanted to try out, and almost immediately I'm freaking out and like backing away from them. Maybe tomorrow on my Twitch stream. I've been streaming on Twitch every single day. Every day I'm uploading 4 reference photos for study over on my Discord, Huckleberry Art Academy Discord. If you want to check it out, I've got the new URL. We're getting the website slowly put together. It's huckleberry.art is the new URL for where the art project is happening. That's going to be its location for the foreseeable future. So if you want to keep an eye on what I'm doing as far as teaching art is concerned, or you want to follow along and learn how to study art along with me, go to huckleberry.art, and then you should be able to find a section that leads you over to the Discord. It's free. It's just a Discord where people are hanging out and studying art, and they're often hanging out in voice chat and chit-chatting about art. And then I'm on there using it as a voice chat for my Twitch stream every day around noon Eastern. So it's been a really great location. We've got a really fantastic community forming over there, and it's free for anyone to join in. You don't even need to be an artist. Even if you just like art and you want to hang out, there's plenty of users that are over there who ventured forward from the Midjourney Discord. Okay. Now I feel like I'm starting to see where everything is. We got this big fold, this big round fold up here in the front. And I could mark it with black, but it's got this light edge. So let's see if we can just do that. This big flute coming down over here. Feeling correct. It folds back on itself and then forward again, creating this little cut upwards here. That's always fun to draw. Whenever I'm drawing like clothing folds back and forth, I always like it when it goes in and then out again, making these square edges. I always feel like that really sells the depth of it. So the thing that's so cool about this is it's got this really high waist up here, and I don't think I'm getting the shape on it fully formed up right. So the waist comes up really high, and there's with this bow on the front. Everything's so square with this outfit. And then it kind of flows downwards. There's these long flowing bell shapes that come downwards off of this really high belt. And that's kind of the cool thing about this whole thing. And then the waistline for the pants, you can see here, are closer to the navel. But the coat has this line up by holding just under the bust, which is very dramatic. And then you can see that like this jacket thing is like, it's not just that it has big puffy sleeves, it's super structured and stiff. You can see the panel is like this big flowing curving panel that's like very stiff. There's not a lot of tight interior folds on it. It's like big and without folds, just very rigid net is giving it this like swoopy, dramatic, geometric feel that's kind of futuristic. And then the model who's wearing it has these beautiful broad shoulders. It's like, so it's got these big broad shapes on top of a model that already has it. Very dramatic figure shape as well. The long neck, always very cool. And then, I'm gonna have to define the face at some point. Something I'm known for not doing. But in the meantime, we're going to keep things fairly geometric as well, just because I'm trying to figure out the structure of this whole thing first and foremost before I worry too much about making sure that all the shadows and details are correct. Once I know where everything is proportionally from each other, then all the surface details and little folds and all that kind of stuff, all that will fall into place. It's all hanging on top of the bigger, broader structure of the thing. So these are high-waisted pants as well. They're going up to the navel, and then you can see the seam of the zipper is going way up there, really long one, down to the inseam over here. So one of the things that I enjoy doing with these studies is to figure out something kind of cool and minimalist with the background. I'm always experimenting with that. So in this case, we already have a minimalist background. It's all pure white. But white on white is tough to show. And there is an opportunity here to express a lot of the same ideas, but to do something with it that is maybe messing with the color or the value, something that allows us to have a little bit of a stylistic interpretation of the subject. Let's see. So the cuff itself is thin, and it's got these like military-like buttons running up and down the whole thing. There's something very dramatic about this shape coming out here. I want to make sure that I get it to come out far enough. Wondering if maybe I'm missing something proportionally. At a certain point, sometimes I want to try to be able to spot this on my own and feel like I understand the structure of it. So I always try to make sure that I'm doing that first. And then at some point later in the process, I will sometimes check against the reference by flipping between the two images and then seeing how they diverge from each other on the navigator. That will give me that'll be my quiz that'll tell me whether or not I'm getting the answers correct on this test. So I'll be able to grade myself a little bit there. I can see that this is swooping up a little forward so it can hang straight down here a little bit more. And maybe the reason why the pants were revealing themselves more than I expected was because I pulled the right side in a little too far to the right. Okay. How close am I? I'm feeling, what's my level of confidence here? The alignment on it, I'm not worried too much about the way in which it is like moved left and right from the composition here. Like within the composition, it's not super important that it's lined up like pixel perfect left to right. But I do worry. Well, number one, I think that like the shape of the head is messing with me here. My messiness on this is causing me to feel like it's maybe differently in proportion than the reference. And make sure I'm feeling the jawline and that I'm getting the ear popping out on the back end to give a clear idea of where the head shape is and direction and the head size. Feeling pretty good about it. I think I'm mostly right. And then I feel pretty good about the shape of the upper sleeve here. It's coming down about the right amount, I think. This comes more straight. Is the width on this right? Ooh, I'm getting a hinky sense. I'm getting that feeling of it being not correct. And what's difficult is that the feeling of things being not correct is often much stronger than the feeling of how they should be correct. It's often very, very difficult to judge the ways in which a drawing should be made differently. Like there's like a sense where you just like, you get a no, but you don't know where that, why no. You get an error message that pops up and it's just in your head. And it's just kind of a blank error message. It just says an error has occurred. You've screwed up the proportions, but you don't get a clear sense on like what that ultimately means. So let's see. Do we want to include this horizon line? We've got a nice convenient horizon line in the form of these bars supporting the light rig in the back or the background thing. I don't think so. I don't think it really adds to it. I think the sort of empty void that she's standing in is adding a lot in terms of atmosphere. I think that I've gone a little bit low over here, maybe, and that is dragging down this bit here. That is dragging down this bit here. They're all kind of connected. Getting these things correct early on is always a struggle for me. But I've been getting a clearer and clearer sense of it the more of these kinds of studies that I do. Okay, and then this fold, this big structured swooping fold comes up really high here. There we go. Not perfect, but also starting to feel right. Like the error messages are starting to die down and go away. So now, am I ready to begin to test myself on my accuracy here? I always hate doing it because it's always get the feeling of getting slapped in the nose by a newspaper. So let's see, how far off am I? Okay. The whole thing seems to be kind of tilting. I thought the positions of the shoulders felt pretty good, but I think I was kidding myself a little bit. I think part of the problem I've been having is, like the head shape the whole thing is kind of skewed where it's getting broader towards the top than it should be. It should be more like this. See, if I skew the whole thing up a little bit, I start to get, way more accurate sort of across the board. It's interesting to me that like our brains seem to be pretty good at sort of geometrically skewing shapes. They're all kind of relative to each other in a way that allows them to all be relatively correct while not being absolutely correct. And that creates a kind of natural skew. And so with this pushed forward a little bit, I'm more or less correct on my structure from there on. Okay, great. So now I'm going to start to get in here and refine some stuff and define some colors and establish a background and all those kinds of things. Let's see. So one of the reasons I typically do the background over the figure is because when I'm doing this, I'm sampling colors from the background to mix down. You can see how, like, even though it looks like it's a figure standing in front of a background, there's actually a bunch of strokes that are, it's happening in front of the background, but it's the same color as the background. And so it's only visible when we take away the background color, or if we were to change the background color at all, you can see how the background color is actually showing through in big sections of it here. And it's actually the foreground, the layer 1 is showing through on top of the background as soon as they no longer color match against each other. This is not necessarily a problem if you're working in a real canvas, but if you ever wanted to make a figure that's kind of cut out on top of the background and work on them separately, you would need to construct this differently, which is the thing I was thinking I never do, I don't really aspire to do, but I love doing experiments on these studies where I can fail in a safer environment. So I got to do that one of these days. I might do it tomorrow on my stream. So let's see. I'm going to be able to start taking questions now because I'm going to be getting into the parts where it's a little bit more on autopilot. If any of you have questions about the work process or about art in general, or there's something that you're stuck on with art that you would like a demo to get help being unstuck, I love getting beginner questions. I love helping people out with issues they're having with their own artwork. Please feel free to ask me whatever you like related to art. I hear there's a bot problem. Ancient Chaos is telling me that there's a bot problem that's bubbling up here on the server right now. I'm not going to be able to answer any questions about Midjourney bots on the server, technical problems you're having with your account or anything like that, but I can answer anything that you want to talk to me about in relation to artwork. So don't be shy. Feel free to raise your hand and you can come join me on stage. We should chat about that, whatever you're interested in. So let's see. My sort of default background color when I don't have a background color in mind is usually a bright yellow. But I worry I lean on it too much. So what if I were to do something like more of a bright blue sky color? I wonder if that's what played good today. It's nice, bright, buoyant blue color. All kinds of B words.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. It's been a minute since I've been back on stage here, but I remember last time we were talking a little bit about the union stuff that was going on with the writers and the actors, and there's been a big development. I'm sure you've heard the VFX union with Mohrbacher, which I think is astonishing, to be honest. It's one of those things where, you want it and you want it and you want it, but you can't make it happen. It's the workers that got to make it happen. And I'm stoked. And And I was just wondering kind of like what was your reaction when you first heard about that, and where do you kind of see things going from here? I mean, what kind of possibilities does this potentially open up for? It's not going to be an easy fight, I know, but
Well, the VFX thing, I've met some VFX artists over the years, and I got to tell you, it sounds like their working conditions have always been completely insane. It's like they have absolutely no job stability. They deal with insane, like very, very unhealthy working conditions, total disrespect from management. And like, I wonder sometimes if the ballooning costs of movies has something to do with the fact that, like, we have these movies now that are so effects heavy, even ones where you wouldn't really think of it. Like,
yeah, I mean, you look at the Flash, and that was like 90% CGI.
Yeah, but even just like a lot of movies that are period pieces, you won't even notice it's a VFX shot. You'll just be like, oh, that's a bunch of old cars, and they have a location that looks like old 1950s town. They found some town in, like, up in the Hudson River Valley that looks basically the same as it did back in the 1950s. But actually what's happening is it's like a bunch of CG cars and a bunch of CG buildings, being replaced behind actors, because like it's even in movies where it looks like they're doing stuff modern day, a lot of times it's easier to fake doing stuff in CG. Like, there was an example from in the Marvel movies where Nick Fury is like sitting in an armchair just in someone's house, and that it turns out that he's actually on a green screen, and he's not even he's supposed to be holding a gun, and he doesn't even have a gun. It's like, gun is CG, the chair is CG, like he's in a CG.
Yes, I saw that. It was so ridiculous.
And you're just like, you guys can't get it's cheaper to do this to get a props department. And it's like, yes, because like whenever there's a department that's non-union, they're just going to go and lean on those guys instead of have everybody else do their jobs. And so it's like, it feels like everyone involved needs to have like to be involved in the larger conversation about work in the industry in order for like the entire thing to function well.
Yeah, for me, I think the big like warning bell, the real like canary in the coal mine was Life of Pi. Because I think we all remember the acceptance speech. They got played off the moment that they started talking about how the studio was going to be shut down. And I think, VFX, it is the foundation upon which like modern Hollywood rests. I don't think that's arguable. I think it's literally VFX artists who keep Hollywood alive. And so it makes me really happy to see that they're recognizing that they have power too. And
that many of them relatively, like it's a very specialized skill. So I imagine that there's not a ton of them that need to organize in order to pull this off.
Yeah. And, particularly too, I think about things like there was the whole controversy over the Secret Invasion intro. I remember when that was happening.
Yeah.
And again, it was a situation where people blamed the tools more than they did the studio who made the decision to use them in the way that they did.
Right.
And, that's why I think it's going to be really, now the VFX artists can... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I have a take here about the Secret Invasion intro. It's like, I was just thinking, like, a couple of weeks ago, I was being asked about the Bigsby's controversy, where there was an artist who had used some AI generation to help finish some illustrations for a Dungeons and Dragons book. And, when it got looked into a little more closely, it turned out that the time that he had actually finished the illustration way before AI became controversial. And I wonder how much that was a similar situation with Secret Invasion, where like the development of that intro sequence was happening around the same time that people were first seeing the aesthetic, the sort of Midjourney aesthetic. like the early like Midjourney V2, and that like it represented this kind of stylistic snapshot when this stuff was particularly novel and interesting. And that's the reason why it was being used. Like they said, it was an aesthetic choice. And honestly, I believe him, because there was a brief moment where anything that had that style on it, that V2 style, was getting tons of traction on social media. Everyone was loving this, like,
Yeah. I mean, you remember when Dolly, like the first version of Dolly, kind of went open, and that was everywhere. And people were really like taken by like the weirdness of it too. I think that was a huge like sticking point. So yeah, like you were saying, I think when I watch the intro, I get a very like uncanny alien sort of vibe. And I don't think it's, I don't think it's right to, I saw all, people were like pausing on certain frames and being like, see, it sucks. And it's like, well, that's not the point. The point is it's supposed to be in motion, and it's supposed to be uncanny. But, it's also like, yes, I like things, I like seeing AI used for things like Secret Invasion. I just like now that, the union stuff is coming together, that these workers might have a say in how these tools are used. Because that's the big thing I'm really behind, is like, I want them to have control over the means of production. over the tools that they use. Yes, use the means, exactly. But yeah. Thank you for your input on that. I don't know if you've been talking to other folks in like the art community.
The illustration world is still very, very shy about the idea of unions. It's like people kind of grumble about it as though it's like, yeah, maybe we could do union or something, but
well,
like
it would be less of a. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
They're just very, very shy about the idea of criticizing the same companies that give them their paychecks. Like,
Yeah.
I'm always amazed that like these people are able to be so brave to like look dead in the eyes of the people that pay them every month and say, I want you to do better. Because like, in this industry, it feels like artists are fungible. And like, it's just it's a death wish to try to criticize your employers, because there's somebody younger and, more hungry and maybe more talented that's right behind you waiting to take your job from you. So to like have solidarity across like a large swath of workers, in that environment requires a lot of bravery. So,
yeah.
And taking that step.
Within the creative industries, there's definitely like this element of exploitation that happens where like the employer takes advantage of the fact that like the people coming in are young and starry-eyed and they're looking to like make their mark in the world. And I think that's the same reason that video game development has also struggled historically with unionization. Except for QA, because it's always the department that's treated the absolute worst that ends up usually leading the union drive, because they're the ones with the least to lose. But I think there's something very powerful about this moment that we're in, and I hope it spreads. I genuinely hope it spreads.
I think that like whenever I've talked about AI in public spaces, like because it's such a controversial topic, I tend to try to talk to it from the perspective of it being a call to action for unions, because I feel like that pulls it away from like asking people to either be on the side of it or against it. But I think like the thing that ultimately concerns people, artists in this discussion, is the feeling that they are likely to be made obsolete. And I think that leads itself really well into this union discussion. And so I've been really trying to focus on that when it gets brought up, because if people are feeling like they're going to be made obsolete by their employers, like, then, they should seize on that and use that to make choices about and form opinions, because, that's the important part here. The important part is not the technology or the companies that are developing new AI tools. It is 100% on who's going to be able to use it.
Yes.
I've been messing with the new Adobe AI tools, and it throws an error message when I try to put my own name into it. So I'm pretty sure I'm in the training data because I'm on Behance, which is also owned by Adobe. And I'm pretty sure that they scraped all the Behance artists for their training their model, but I can't actually use my own name. So I'm able to, on Midjourney, my name gets used quite a bit by other people, but I'm also able to use it myself. On Adobe, they're going to take my training data, but they aren't going to allow me access to that training data, which to me feels high.
That's messed up.
The fact that it could be an error for putting my own name into it feels really, really strange.
Yeah, no, that is bizarre. And, I think it's, like you were saying, it's about control over tools. It's a question of power. Because I see the big issue as the employers are always in this position of power where they can make unilateral decisions that the employees have no recourse against. So, when it comes to AI, well, the fact of the matter is the technology exists now. The cat's out of the bag. You can't just stuff AI back in the bag, but it can become a site for struggle. It can become a site where the workers can, and the actors were doing the same thing when it came to digital likenesses and control over large language models for script writing. That was a very explicit part of their contract, and one that they're not going to be willing to budge on, very understandably. But yeah, I think that was about all I had to say. Thank you very much for talking about this. Always good to hear from kind of the other side on this. So have a good one, and I'm loving the piece. Thank you.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of issues in the illustration and concept art space that come back to where artists' sense of value and them valuing their own work and being on the other end of the negotiating table from their employers. And it's always been troubling to me, and I always want it to go in the favor of the creatives. But it's difficult because creative people have been historically fairly bad at advocating for themselves, and and they and then the institutions, entertainment companies, toy companies, they tend to be very good at arguing for themselves because they have a team of lawyers. And when we come to these conflicts where worry about how art is being used or reused and the ownership and the control of it, it's very difficult for the artist to have a foothold because they are not often willing to. It's their employer. They're perfectly willing to, and it's this very asymmetrical ground. And I think that the artists have more power than they realize, but it's going to take time. It's going to take a shift in culture, and it's going to take some people to step up and organize, which that's really tough. I would absolutely try to help push the organization effort, but it's not necessarily my fight. I haven't worked in any of these industries in a long time. I am totally independent. I hold on to in an effort to hold on to my own rights and to be able to guide my own creativity. I actually don't work for anyone. I I do gigs here and there. I do some, I've got some paid contracts running right now, but none of it is like really for my main work. My main like day to day is like me making paintings and posting them for my fans. And that's the way it's been for me for the last 10 years. Like I was frustrated 10 years ago with the state of the entertainment industry and games. And, now I see like different parts of the entertainment industry in film and games, like starting to change their perspective on how the power should be handled. And it's great. I'm all for it. I've always wanted the best for people who work in creative fields because it's tough business to be a part of. Let's see. Bit by bit, I'm finding my way through all the little changes here that are helping to define what this looks like. And again, if any of you guys want to come up on stage, you are welcome to raise your hand, come and join me on stage, and ask any kind of questions while I work. See, I see the seam has actually got this nice little S curve in it. It goes this way and then back this way again. Let's test out the old version. Nadia Fizal, hello.
Can you please explain it? I've just joined it.
Yeah. So I'm painting this in Photoshop here. The piece on the left is something that I found on Pinterest. And then I'm using the brush tool here. I've got a brush that is my classic painting brush. You can see on the camera, I've got my pen tablet here. This is a Wacom Intuos. And then, so it gives me the ability to like control the cursor very precisely, as well as like control like the cursor with a pressure sensitivity on the tip of the pen. So I have this very simple round brush, and I'm able to pull colors off the canvas by holding the Alt key on the keyboard here, my left hand. And every time I click it down, it allows me to suck a little bit of color up off the canvas, and then I can move it around and place it somewhere else to lighten or darken areas, to push the colors around. And, bit by bit, I'm slowly making little corrections that are making the piece on the right a little bit more like the piece on the left.
I think you're creating a statue, right?
It's not really a statue. It's a model in a white dress.
Okay. Good, thanks.
Mm-hmm. My pleasure. Yeah, these kinds of studies have been really, really helpful for me to like grow my comfort with different working methods, and like more than the moving my brush around, it's been really helpful for me to spot things with my eye, to spot the things that I want to change. And it's growing this like language in my head, this visual language, by getting to see the results of my work instantaneously, like getting to compare it against like a sample that's correct. And it allows me to like quickly pick up on little nuances and add them into my brain that I can then, download and use for my future imaginative work. So I said it was maybe not training my hands so much, but actually like I'm finding myself needing to make fewer brush strokes because I get impatient with myself when I have to go and pet this little areas over and over again. Trying to keep these down to an hour or so in a lot of cases. And in order to get everything that I want on the canvas, I need to do it as efficiently as possible. So I'm trying to find the shortest path between the rougher version of the painting and then the sample piece. So I've got a nice intermediate stage that's coming together. I think I'm going to go in and add some detail in the face. I have this very, very rough alien-looking block out on the face. You can see I've got the head shape is relatively correct, and I've got the shapes of the forehead and maybe a rough sense of the eye sockets and the sheen that's coming off the inner part of the cheek here. But overall, it's still quite rough. So I think what I'm going to do is smooth out some of the least finished bits here, some of the more rough and unnatural looking pieces. Try to make sure that I have the structure of the thing the structure of the face as close to the reference as possible. So where the eye sockets are coming in and where the silhouette is changing. This will give me a basis for being able to make more precise marks on the next step. You might think that details are a matter of making a bunch of small, precise brushstrokes, but the details themselves don't mean anything unless they're in the context of larger shapes that are in the correct spot. So this setup part where I'm trying to create these simpler versions of the model, they are doing they're going to be doing all the heavy lifting, and the details are just going to be taking all the credit at the end. So we've got this is something I've been trying. I was actually watching a tutorial on this the other day to try to figure out how to do this better. And that was the big insight that I pulled away from it. This idea that it's easier to create these effortless looking, simple details on top when the structure underneath is built in a way that supports it. So by creating a more simplified version of the facial geometry, you create this kind of underpainting you can build all of the details on top of. So this intermediate stage, when we're starting to refine and cut in all of this stuff, that's when I'm able to, that's the part where I'm able to get the most real work done. This is the part that's going to end up making all of the difference once I get to the final stages. Being a little bit more careful at this stage is going to allow me to get the results that I'm looking for at the next one. I guess that's been something I have taught in other formats. So it's nice to find that it remains true in this format as well. It's one of those universal truisms that every layer in a building needs to builds on top of the one right below it. So in this case, it's the larger structures end up creating a space for the smaller structures to sit on top of. Seems pretty obvious saying it out loud. But then I've gone and done so many of these studies, and so often I'm finding myself struggling to try to balance between all these different little transitions that are happening all over a face, and to hold them together in a way where they all make sense, and to treat the delicate ones delicately and the larger ones more roughly, and to balance those two things out in this interweaving structure. It just feels it feels so difficult. And so every single day I'm in this struggle going back and forth with these different these like larger and smaller shapes, and like trying to figure out how do I leave in a sense of like my own hand? How do I leave a sense of like expressive mark making, but also have it feel accurate? Because the challenge is that I want it to feel like there is something effortless and simple about it, but I also want it to be in the right place. Like I could just go and spend 30 seconds on it and it would be dead easy, but it would look bad. Like, how do we make it look good and effortless at the same time? That's the challenge. And it's not an easy one to solve. So this was the lesson that I learned from this tutorial, and I thought, that seems smart. I'm going to give it a real shot. And so instead of going in with a rough version of these darker marks that are defining the most precise parts of the face, I'm instead doing the underlying structure in a looser way first, and then just cutting in these more precise, darker shapes at the end in order to give it, hang them on top of that simpler structure that I've created at the beginning. Creating an order of operations, a process for me to be able to pick these things apart, treat them separately. Which, I mean, historically, that is the way of making a piece of art, is to figure out how do we separate out the different components, visual components of the thing that we're trying to paint, and how do we address them separately so that they slot together in the end. There's no single way of accomplishing that goal. All right, let's see. I think the thing that's throwing me off about this left eye is that I went a little ambitious with that reflection lower than it should have been. Didn't give me room for the eye fold. She's got this very reflective eye makeup on. Wow. I think it jumped ahead a little bit. I was excited to go and get those details knocked in, and then I think I jumped ahead a little bit on getting the structure exactly right, and some of the places feel a little bit underbaked as I'm getting to them. The process of learning is like a mixture of reward and punishment signals, where your brain tells you, congratulates you for doing all the things correctly, and then makes you feel bad for all the things you've done wrong. And accepting those signals, putting yourself in a position where you're going to be receiving mental punishment and reward, that's the game. Giving yourself another attempt at trying to do things right, and acknowledging when they're not going well, and allowing yourself to feel that sense of, that little minor suffering that comes into the brain when you're not doing it exactly correct. The mixture of those two feelings, that's the learning happening. So there's a little bit of reflected light coming in on the back side of the chin over here. I'm going to use the background color to represent these reflected lights to give my model here a little bit more volume. So there's a difference here between the key light that's going across her face. That I'm going to keep black and white, maybe for the whole thing, maybe just for now. And then there's these other lights. These are reflections, in some cases reflection. This here might be actually like a mirror-like reflection of the white on the floor or maybe of the dress. But because there's I've got this blue background color, I can use the blue background color to create these fill lights here.
Yep.
The same thing across the side of the neck. Want this to be with the blue. Oh, I see. There's a reflection coming up across the top of her collarbone here. And then this is a shadow. I see now. There is a card or something that's casting a shadow across her. At a distance, I thought this might be some sort of shirt. But it's actually a shadow, and that's the same thing that's causing the line across the sleeve here. So the shadow is creating very different values across the very light fabric and across her much darker skin. And so we've got this little bit of a cast shadow that's appearing across the collar here. And then on the skin tone, it becomes much clearer. These differences in like the way that the shadows are representing might be a byproduct of the way the photo is being processed by the photographer. Not all this is happening in the camera, but might be happening in the studio in Photoshop. Just because something's a photo doesn't mean it's necessarily a representation of reality. A lot of the same decisions that I'm making as an artist when I'm trying to paint a figure are the same choices that are happening in a photographer's mind when they're working with a piece in the studio. And what's funny is we might actually be using the same software in a lot of cases. So this is that shadow, again, cutting. I thought this was maybe like a light that was wrapping around, but it's actually a light that is, the key light is being blocked. And so the whole lower part of her body is actually in shadow. Interesting. Stiffen up some of these edges to give myself a little bit more of a sense of precision, completeness.
Hi.
Hello.
I have a few questions, if
Jody.
you don't mind.
Sure. Happy to answer.
7, actually.
7 questions. Specifically 7?
Yes.
Hit me.
In the creative process.
Creative process is a lot of steps. And it's different depending on each piece and what I'm trying to accomplish. Like, can you narrow it down a little bit?
I guess the general process.
Like for when I'm working on something imaginative? Or
Yeah.
because I feel like I'm doing something creative here, making creative choices to like stylize and, make something a little unique out of this photograph here. And it would be a very different creative process for when I'm like illustrating an angel.
Maybe specifically, like, you have an idea in your head, something you want to create. How do you go about making that?
So I'm going to start by saying I think there's a little bit of a misnomer about the way that most artists work. Like, I think there's an assumption that like an artist has an idea in their head, like a vision, and then the process of drawing or painting is a lot like dictating that vision, or like if somebody were to plug a plug in the back of your head and just like plug it into a TV, that it's kind of like a way of like letting that image out of your head and then onto a screen. But I don't think that that's the case. For me, I will sometimes have a thing in my head that I want to express, but more often I have an idea that is like a thing I want to represent. Like, I want to make a painting about what it's like to like want something for a long time and be stuck waiting for it. Right? And the creative process is me trying to figure out, what does it feel like to have a sensation like that? Like, what's going through my head? What does it feel like in my body? Like, what words do I associate with waiting? And what kind of posture do I have while I'm stuck waiting? Like, and I think about that a lot, and I think about word association. And then I'll go online and I'll start searching for some of these words and for some of these poses and for some of these looser ideas. And I'll see if there's something out there in the world that is in line with the kind of feeling that I'm having, even if it's relatively abstract. And I will collect them all into a big folder so that I've got a singular spot to look for all of the reference material associated with this idea that I want to express. And then I will spend some time working on that idea on paper. Most of my paintings, they start off as pencil drawings first. I always assumed that that's how everyone worked, but nowadays, as I'm trying to like teach more artists about my process, I'm finding a lot of them are asking, I'm telling them, oh, why don't you just go draw your ideas on paper? And they're like, but I have an iPad. Or they're like, I need to like buy more computer hardware so I can draw my ideas. And I'm like, or you could buy printer paper for 1/1000th of the price and just go use that. But I'm like a boomer or whatever, elder millennial. And so I put my stuff down on paper, and then I scan it in, I pull it into Photoshop, and then I do a lot of what I've been demonstrating here, which is like sort of trying to cut away at it, build on top of it, make creative choices about what should be done differently, look at a bunch of reference material to try to like either get something different about the anatomy of a figure, or like about the space of a landscape, or just trying to get the right vibe of whatever I'm illustrating. And then at some point I lose all perspective on what I think I'm making, and I have to like call it a day and like share it with other people. So I think that part of the creative process is putting it out into the world so that other people can look at it and let you know what it is and what it means to them. And so I post it. I'm not really looking for critique most of the time. I'm mostly just like making sure that it's in, that my artwork is being shared and not just being bottled up. And yeah, at some point I kind of dare myself to like see what people are thinking about it, whether or not it's getting a lot of likes, getting a lot of comments, if the comments are nice, what people are saying. Though that's not really the main focus. Mostly it's just about making sure that the artwork has a life outside of me. And yeah, and then I repeat that, and I do it over and over again for 20 years so far. Planning on doing that over and over again for the rest of my life, even if it's not my job. Is that question number one?
Yeah.
Pretty big question.
Yeah, I guess it is. I've never I always just assumed that people just have an idea or a picture in their mind, because that's, for me, that's what happens. I just have a picture in my mind and I try to draw it.
Yeah, I do that sometimes, but like it's not the typical way in which I work. I find that the image I have in my mind is like an option, and it's often not the best one.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, oftentimes I find that there are parts of my mind that have other opinions, and in order to allow them the opportunity to speak, I need to like quiet down and like try not to dictate the work so fiercely. And in doing that, I get contributions from other parts of myself that are quieter, but usually smarter than the loud parts.
Okay, can I move on to another question?
Oh yeah, sure.
Has AI impacted your creativity?
I've had some pieces that I used AI for part of them that I thought were pretty good, and it helped in the sense that like I've used AI in a couple of different ways. Like I've used it to modify like a work in progress and have it introduce new ideas to the process that way. And then I've also used AI as like part of that reference gathering step that I was talking about, but rather than go to the internet and look for existing photos and drawings to reference, I ask Midjourney, for some keywords or some descriptions of images and see what it comes back with. And like it can add a little bit sometimes. It tends to not be the biggest voice in the room when I'm working, just because there's already such a mix of things going through my own head that I need to balance out, that like trusting an AI to like have a really good opinion about stuff is challenging. There's not a lot of room for it in my process. So it's it's there sometimes. I think I think that's probably going to depend on the person. I know some people have told me that AI has really supercharged their creativity. For me, it's been a nice little boost, a little supplement to add to the repertoire of different tools that I have.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
My next question is, do you think the creative process of artists will change, like in the overall community because of AI?
I mean, professional artists have been pretty hesitant to pick it up. I know there's been but the level of controversy around it has made it so that a lot of people have not been discussing it too closely yet. I think there's probably going to be some amount of adaptation and like uptake on AI over the course of the next like 5 years, but I don't see it as being like massively transformative to the way that artists work. Largely because like art is a reflection of an artist's intention, and like the AI it has a hard time interacting with that process. It's really tough to like work intentionally with AI. It's something that I think that some people have gotten better at than others, and I think that the software is probably going to get better at over time. But it's like, I don't know. I think it's probably going to be. I think the amount that AI affects people's creative process is going to increase over time, but it's never going to be so much as to like overwrite it. There is something about having a direct relationship to the surface, just like pushing paint around, that if you haven't done a lot of it, you may not realize the reason why people hold it in such high regard. It's a very special experience, and it's not at all similar to working with AI. They can work collaboratively, but it's not a matter of either or. It's It's really going to be a yes and if there's going to be an overlap between the two.
I agree. My other question is, what does being an artist mean to you?
I mean, to me personally, being an artist has been most everything. It's like how I've developed most of my personal relationships, how I've made all the money in my life, how I've, met my wife. So the sort of origins of my family, my wife's also an artist, met at art school. Like, to me, being an artist is like access to the whole world. It's it's the center of my universe. And so, if I talk about it in reverent ways, maybe that's why.
I like that. Has AI impacted that meaning for you?
No. Yeah, it's strained some of my professional relationships, which is frustrating. But it hasn't strained the most important relationships in my life, and it hasn't reshaped the relationship I have to the creative process in a large enough way to really get to the core of my identity as an artist.
Mm. Would you mind elaborating on the professional impacts?
Oh, I mean, there's just some people it's a controversial thing. And so some people have seen that have used AI or that I speak on this server, and they no longer want to speak to me.
Yeah, I've noticed that there's like a big, like, I think people are afraid mostly,
Yep,
and they're angry.
that's right.
Like, I think some people are angry with AI.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that they're scared. It makes them anxious. It makes them. It asks big questions that they are worried what the answers are going to be. It raises some potential conflicts with employers and about money and control in employment. It's like, all those things, they raise a lot of emotions in people, and they don't have easy answers, and maybe not any answers at all that we have access to. It's the sort of thing I've thought a lot about, consider all the time, but I don't feel like I have a concrete perspective on, even after like a year or so of working with AI and thinking a lot about it. I'm finding now, as this settled a little bit, some people are in, if over a voice chat, people are maybe a little bit more open to having some level of like reasonable discussion, but it's like still a very, very contentious topic in the art industry. And it keeps people from communicating with each other when they feel these kinds of, hostile feelings about this thing that they can't quite put their finger on. They know they're upset, but they don't know why. And they're searching for a narrative, and that's always a very, very tough place to be.
Definitely. My other question is about AI growing it as a medium. In this new category of like AI and artists who use it primarily, how do you think that will impact the community of art?
I don't know. I know there's plenty of artists who use AI as like a large part of their process, and I don't think that those artists are taking the place of traditional artists. I think that there's always been some sort of back and forth with mediums in art. Like there's always been new people have been discovering new ways of making art, and there's going to be some interest from in the fine art space about it. In commercial art, people will explore new tools and technologies. That's a process that has been going on for the length of all art history, as far as I can tell. So it's AI to me feels like a step in that chain, but not like a redefinition of like what's happening there. It's like, just like any new major formative technology as it's come out has altered the conversation about what is and is not art, how people work, and all that kind of stuff. Happened with photography. It happened with the advent of digital art, and probably even like I've even heard this about when acrylic paint was popularized in commercial work. There was a point where everyone worked in oils, and then all these annoying kids came along with their acrylic paint, trying to claim that acrylic paintings could be just as good as oil paintings, and everyone scoffed at them and thought they were obnoxious idiots. And like now it's like, it's weird. Like, we don't see these kinds of discussions, and they don't happen in public spaces. No one's professionally worried about them. I mean, most of the artists I know are all digital artists anyway. Like, the idea of working in any traditional medium is seen as kind of clumped together. And now, again, we've seen it where all of the artists who are working by hand, whether they're working in oils or acrylic or digital, are all being kind of clumped together in contrast with people who are using text prompts. And so, like, this wheel just keeps turning and turning. And I expect it will continue to keep turning. It feels kind of natural, to be honest.
I think everyone should be lucky that we get to live in a time where there's a major change.
Maybe. I mean, what is it? Isn't that a Chinese curse? May you live in interesting times. It's like it's not a well-wishing statement necessarily, but I like living in changing, interesting times. I'm somebody who's always looking for the next new thing, and I'm always excited about technology. And so I have enjoyed seeing the ways that like this has been disruptive, and to consider new ways of working. And honestly, I think that working with AI has, I spent about a year trying to figure out ways of integrating it in my process. And the end outcome was me doing this. Like, I wasn't doing studies before AI. I've started doing like these kinds of like more technical art studies in my time after spending time with AI. And I've talked with other artists who have used AI extensively as well, and they've had some similar experiences also, where working with a tool that is highly automatic has led them to start to seek out the joys of making things in the super manual way. That there is something special about working on art as a very manual, very like time-consuming process, and that like having that not be like a mandatory part of the process, but one that we opt into, has like made it more appealing. It's like, it's not an obligation to get good at like lighting and rendering and stuff. It's a choice, and that choice is made more appealing by the fact that it's optional. Like, I'm getting an opportunity to choose art again, having experimented with like, making JPEGs through text prompt.
That's a good view of it. When I was first like hearing about AI art, I was admittedly like angry about it. As like an artist that hasn't made a lot of money off of my own work, it was kind of scary to think that, oh, AI is going to take over. But as I've been in this space and tried it out for myself, and just I've gotten like used to it, and more so like accepted it for what it is, and I'm not afraid anymore. I think the big thing was just being afraid of what the future would look like, and is there going to be less opportunities for artists in like the commercial world specifically?
I don't know. It's like, there are a lot of opportunities in the commercial world for artists that are pretty lame, like where you're more or less being treated like a machine that's supposed to churn out JPEGs to spec. And, that kind of treatment is problematic in like a lot of different ways. It saps the creative world of its potential. And it also, fungible with each other and treats artists as being interchangeable. That leads to this kind of like fear that artists have even before AI, that like they're always on the verge of being made obsolete by some other artist or some other art, process or change in their industry. And it's like they're permanently living in terror. And I don't think that's a technology issue. I think that is like a state of the employment and the industry. Like we were talking a little bit earlier about unions. And I really think that fear is better addressed by dealing with like banding together with other artists and working to negotiate collectively with the people who like pay for art in industries like in entertainment. And, it could help address a lot of longstanding issues that we've had in our space. And, I think if AI brings it to a head, I think that's a good thing. Like we should be considering this stuff. Whether AI existed or not, I think we're overdue to like think about workers' rights and employment and like what it means to be a professional artist from like the perspective of, making art for money.
Yeah, for sure.
It's never been a very secure field. Being an artist or a musician or an actor or whatever has never been a place that people go for security. And so that sense of insecurity has been so pervasive for so long. You may think that AI is like just icing on the cake, but I think it more than that, I think it's been revealing a sense of anxiety that's always been there.
Yeah. And one that might not ever go away.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's not a surefire bet to get into the arts as a matter of employment, but I think artists can work together in order to make a world that's less scary and punitive to creative people. I think that collectively artists have the potential to work together to make each other's lives better. And, I would love to see that level of cooperation.
Yeah. Thank you for answering my questions.
Is this for a school assignment? Did I just complete your school assignment for you?
I'm trying to research about the effects of AI on the general art community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask some questions. Yeah.
No, I'm happy to answer.
Would you mind if I use these answers?
What, for a school assignment?
Yeah.
No problem at all.
Okay, I probably would just like put your name as anonymous or something.
Sure. I get asked all the time. I get asked all the time when I'm in my email. Well, I mean, not all the time. I mean, there were periods where it was like really hot, where I was just getting like every week a new email from an art student who had been given the assignment of like contact a working artist and interview them and ask them about these things. And it's just like the most annoying assignment because like every working artist gets these all the time. And it's just like, it's not possible to fulfill like all the requests if you're somebody who's like very visible on the internet. And so I just developed a policy of just saying no to all of them. And so if you use this for a school assignment, you'd be the first student in a long time that's figured out a solution to sneak in time to get me to answer a bunch of questions for the sake of completing an assignment, like capturing me when I'm like no one else is talking to me on a live stream like this, is like, if any art students are out there listening, this is the trick. Capture them while they're streaming and painting. It's the one weird trick that gets you to complete these kinds of assignments.
Thank you for answering my questions.
No problem. I love answering questions. I just normally don't have time to help people out with their high school or college assignments. So yeah, it's my pleasure. Look, I'm really, I feel like I'm getting that sense of like, yeah, I'm getting somewhere with this. This is like a very precise piece. It's coming together very quickly because, you know, I'm not working a lot with the background, and there's like, it's so monochrome. I'm able to focus almost entirely on the values. So once I get cleared with this section, I'm like really good on this. Like, this was an easy one. I took all of my references that I was collecting for the next month and I put them in a folder. So every morning I'm going to be posting them on the Discord. There's one portrait study, one landscape study, one master study, and one cool anime drawing. People are allowed to pick one or all of them to go to use as their. I just wanted to create a nice resource, help people with their daily studies, because I had a bucket of these that I was using for myself, mostly portrait studies, that I wanted to. And then people kept asking me, "Oh, can I use that reference too?" So I made a space for them to be able to share them. And yeah, instead of like, I used to be picking out, like trying to be picky and say like, oh, this is the one I'm going to do today. I always want the best one in the pile. And now I'm just doing them in chronological order. So some of the ones that I might have rejected are now rising to the surface and getting picked out and used for my study time. This is one of those where I thought when I was seeing it originally that it may have been too simple or like too difficult to like place all the features because it's such an odd silhouette. But I have muscled my way through it. I'm largely complete. And now I'm going to move on to a little bit of stylization with it, I think. Picking out some edges to smear, finding some crusty brushes to make the edges crustified. And I have a half hour to spare on this stream too. So today I am winning. I am blasting through it, and I'm feeling great about that. So I was saying at the top of this thing that today was the day. I was prepared, I was ambitious, and I'm ready to wreck shop here in Photoshop. So that's exactly what happened. Feels good to know that I was going to come in strong, and then I did. So let's see. A lot of the light on this side of the figure is this reflected light coming from the environment. And so I'm going to shade it with this blue background color a little bit to give it a sense of the light, like which light is spilling over, create this bright edge. There we go. One of my temptations here is to want to break up some really, really long edges. I like the big shapes, but long edges, they tended to look a little bit better when they get a little bit distressed and lost part of the way through the middle. See, I just got a whole bunch of new brushes that I downloaded, mostly for free. Actually, all of them for free. One pack from a friend, and then another pack from the very good artist Yuming Lee, who feels like they're blowing up more and more by the day. There's some of their stuff in my reference folder, and then I'm seeing them all over social media getting tons of love. And they released their brush pack, which I cannot make heads or tails of personally, but I'm enjoying trying out some new ones to create some slightly more novel textures. Maybe something a little crustier. Trying to figure out what these even look like. A little soft. What's this? Read. Whoa. Ooh, interesting. Good for a nice textural fill. Ooh. Very fuzzy on the edges. This would be good for drawing. Keeping things nice and loose. A little splattery. Not seeing a ton of crunch. It's more like big fuzzy edges on a lot of these. Maybe I'm using them wrong. Let's see. We'll make a new layer here so I can do. What if I were to turn these bars into scribbles? And because they're on a layer by themselves, I can blast them out. The eraser tool. That's a cool little accent, kind of. Though I think that this texture brush looks so fuzzy and it doesn't look like a rough painted mark. It looks more like a feathered boa, thin feathered boa. I'm going to be wrapping this up in about 20 minutes. So you guys are welcome to come on stage and ask me any last minute questions if you're interested. I see if a couple people sign up, raising their hands. Anyone's welcome to join. I wonder if maybe these are really good when you start layering them a little bit.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, T.S. Love.
No, I'm from Hamburg, Germany.
Welcome.
And I have a question.
Sure.
Have you ever thought about recording the values of your pet and let them analyze with machine learning? Because I just when I was watching your paintings the last hour, you tell a story, or you always say, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and then you do it with your hands. So maybe it's possible that you talk to your paint and it's drawing based on the values that are calculated on your pet. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, maybe. It's like I at one point I gave a bunch of my source files, like the high resolution finished paintings of mine, to Midjourney staff, because there was a question of like, hey, is there something mathematically significant in these images that like creates a sense of style? And it included works in progress. So you could see like how they would progress from like a sketch to a final. And is there some sort of mathematically significant like association with like the way that they kind of like build up over the course of their life, you know, to make
no. Also, I don't mean some stages. I mean the exact recording like, I don't know how many times per second you change the position with your hands and press, and you know what I mean? The exact values, what you're doing with your hands.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is you're looking at a recording that is the exact process of my hands. It's this. It's been crystallized as a file already. Like the thing, like artwork is a crystallization of, it is a recording of the artist movement of their hands. Like all of those actions are baked into the pixels themselves.
Sure, but you sometimes overdraw something or change the color. You manipulate things and so on. And I mean, the whole time, like a movie with timestamps. And
yeah, there's in certain programs they automatically record those. So they're like, if you work in Procreate, for instance, there is all the actions are recorded, and so they can be played back with a fairly small file size, because they just need to play back the actions and not the actual like pixels themselves. So that's something that already exists.
Yeah, but what would be really interesting is your exact movement of your hand.
Yeah, that's how they record the playback files. Great. Photoshop doesn't record that, I don't think, but a lot of other art programs do. There was even very simple ones, like ones that were doing working on the web software, like there's a thing called an Oikaki board that was very popular back in the day, where it was popularized in Japan, where people would draw on like a web-based program collaboratively, and instead of transmitting the pixel data, they would just transmit all of the inputs of the artist's hand motion. So that would allow there to be like a central canvas that was worked on by multiple people, and then also you would be able to play that canvas's actions back from beginning to end without having to capture video data. So that's something that's been around for really, really long time. Though Photoshop doesn't do it, and I don't think that the process is recorded on the tablet driver side, but inside a piece of art software, many of them, they actually do record all of the hand motions, so that each individual stroke is being recorded for its start position, end position, intensity, direction, motion, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it is a much more efficient way of capturing like the process rather than through video.
Because I was thinking about a robot hand, and when you get the data from your hand movement while you were painting, and you're saying something like, I'm turning the eye color from green to blue, and you're just move your hand, and the process could be analyzed, and a robot hand could do the same. So you can talk to the robot, and he's painting something. So you can tell a story, and then a painting is drawn by a robot hand that learned how to draw certain things, like how to put a glow on clothes, or how to change the position of the hand or the fingers with the shadows and so on, but not based on images, based on hand movement.
It presumes that you know what the state of the canvas is as well, because it's not the hand movement that matters; it's the relative difference between the states on the canvas. Because there's not a hand motion that translates into changing an eye color. Presumes you know where the eye is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You need the picture too. Yeah, the picture and the movement. So I want to leave the stage to give it to somebody else. Thank you for your answer.
Yeah.
It was my thought when I was watching. Yeah. Thank you for the answer.
Lucent Nix, if you have a question, you can unmute. There you go.
Cool. All right, great. How are you doing?
Hey there, how's it going?
Good. So I just discovered your art for the first time, seeing you in Midjourney. I just kind of got into it not that long ago and joined the Discord. So thanks for you guys having this event. I was I've spent time trying to understand AI, and I'm a complete layman. But from your perspective, the debate about like the source material and data set for AI being like a copyright infringement issue, do you think there's any credence to that, or do you lean a different way?
My theory, my understanding of like the legal theory is that I don't think that the case I don't think there's a case for training data being a copyright infringement. I think that there's probably going to be something that's going to happen with like either a regulation or something, with like some sort of guidance on like how AI training data can be gathered and used and stuff. But I don't think it's necessarily a copyright issue specifically. But that's just my theory. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not like trained in this in any way, more so than like the average person. And then my main stake, I have a certain amount of stake in this because my work is shared around the internet enough that I'm in basically all the training sets. So going back pre-Midjourney, pre-Stable Diffusion, I was using some AI back in those days, and I could identify by the way that it was performing that my name was in the training data for those models as well. My artwork has been shared around pretty pervasively. And so anywhere where people are collecting large amounts of artwork off the internet, I'm probably getting sucked up in there. I haven't noticed anything negative for my own business as a result of this. And so the idea that it's like negatively impacting me, I'm skeptical of it, because if anyone was going to experience negative effects from this, I would be one of the best test cases, because my name is one of the most used in Midjourney, and it is used across like basically anywhere where this technology is found, my data is found as well. So if there was somebody who could look at like the way that my business ran, or like my public image, or whatever measurable way that I could claim to be harmed, like if anyone was going to find it for someone, it would probably be someone like me. It would be like me or like Greg Rakowski, or like high up on the list of people who could make those kinds of claims. And personally, I can't speak for anybody else. I haven't noticed any real harm to myself and my brand as a result of being in the training data. It doesn't bother me. There seems to be some fairly nice little side benefits where, like more people hear about my work as a result of my name getting used a lot in text prompts and shared among people who are creating AI art. So I see it personally as an opportunity for myself. Mm-hmm.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt that. I completely concede that point. You're a person that has enough name recognition or acclaim based on this, so it sort of becomes a push, right? Whatever people that may not have contacted you directly to do work, because they're doing like pseudo commissions through Midjourney, you're also getting a large amount of people that are for the first time seeing your name and then drawing them to your Instagram.
Well, I also don't make money by working for people.
Understood.
Like that's the other thing to understand about the situation, is that like I don't do commissions generally. So if the people were to say like this idea that people would use Midjourney to instead of commissioning me is like a moot point, because my income is based off of people buying merchandise from me, like lifestyle items like mouse pads or like my art book. And that's the way in which I make all my money. And so the exposure that I get from being a notable artist that's used widely in AI has the potential to introduce people to my art, and then they might buy my stuff, which is not a thing. You're not going to be able to create an entirely new art book for yourself based off of Midjourney. You're not going to be like, instead of buying this art book online of this artist I like, I'm going to make a book of art and publish it and put it on my own coffee table. Like, that's just not how people interact with art. So I don't see that as being a disruption to the way that like my business operates, but it's also not being an artist who operates primarily by selling merchandise and not by selling services means that I'm in a different situation than somebody whose primary business is freelance.
Understood. So let's pivot then from that branding question. I appreciate you kind of telling me a little about the business and how you make your income mostly. If there was an eventuality where a company like Redbubble or Teespring or whoever that had the resources to do printing, having AI interface that said, hey, we could make all these different merchandising items based on any premise and idea, right?
That already exists.
Okay. So I'm not familiar.
For years. Yeah, it's like nobody really wants to tickle themselves that bad, you know? Like I've talked to people who are big AI users. I've talked to, when this first came out, I was asking friends who were like, you know, fans of art, hey, would you ever want to like, you know, make your own personal vision so you can hang it up on your wall? And they're like, ew, why? Like nobody, like artists don't make art so they could hang their own art on their own walls. And the idea that people are going to like take on the job of an artist to like make art and then like decorate their homes with it is not the way that this has gone. And that, because that service has existed for a while. There was some early AI apps that was the primary method of monetizing, was rather than monetizing by like creating the images, they were monetizing by allowing people to buy prints of the images they did create. I don't think it's a particularly lucrative business.
So I'm sort of brought to this like place where that's completely reasonable, and it makes sense. So do you think then for art and specifically, it's not going to be as affected because, let's say, hypothetically, based on what you're saying, people enjoy participating in art by purchasing and viewing it, but the ardor of making art is reserved for artists mostly, right? Not for people that are going to use an AI program to then go to the extent of, you know, making wardrobe collections and plushies and stuff like you're saying, right?
Yeah, like the place where it ends up, that I think there's the best case to say that it'd be disruptive is in the case of private commissions. Because like somebody wants an image of their D&D character for vanity's sake. Like getting an artist to do that can cost hundreds of dollars. And it's like, they're not planning on hanging those images. They're not planning on like distributing them or like using them as part of a business. They just want an image to exist in the world for the sake of vanity, period. They can go to a service like Midjourney and get that done a lot cheaper, but with like a little less like direct, at a very high quality, but a little less like ability to make specific direction. And so some people have said, oh, well, if I'm there's going to be no more D&D character commissions, and that's how my business is going to be hurt by AI. And I'm like, yeah, maybe it's decently credible, but I also know plenty of people who they still do D&D character commissions even in a world that's like post AI. But I'm sure there's that. It's one of the few business cases where I can imagine AI is like completely eliminating like a micro industry.
Okay, do you think it will? So let's just, I have a young son and he's just getting into artwork, right? So the satisfaction of doing art, I think, is an important part. And you mentioned that, right? People that want to make art, it's not just to put it on your own walls.
Yeah, very few people put it on their own walls. It's mostly like, you're going to be putting up his art on the walls, but
right,
you're not going to be like, and then look at the crayon drawing that I made and put that on the fridge next to his. Like right. that would seem like a crazy person.
Right. So, but I guess my worry as maybe as a parent and an artist in my own right, did drawings and sketches and stuff when I was younger, loved, early comic book artists and admired them. The emulation aspect of developing artistic style is like a significant part of it, right? You find an artist that you admire and you work from their process sort of through your process. Do you think this sort of changes that developmental stroke for a lot of artists as they're coming up and developing, if they use AI in that way, that they're like going to create an idea, a style, and then go off of that?
Maybe. I don't think in a negative capacity. Like, I think one of the things that's really interesting about what AI does is it has the capacity for creating like synthesis on a mass scale, where it's like, if you could take your top 3 favorite comic book artists whose styles were totally different, you could ask it to give you a style that was a halfway point between all 3 of them. A thing that like asking a human artist to do would be nearly impossible. So you could be like, give me a bunch of images that are like, you know, this, you know, that are sort of halfway between like Jack Kirby and Todd McFarlane. It'd be like, a human being would be like, I'd have no idea what you're asking for. But the AI, it doesn't care. It's just like, oh yeah, sure thing, boss. And so if you were an art student and you were interested in mixing a bunch of styles together, you could do it in a way that is like previously impossible. And so there's like the potential for weird sort of previously inaccessible style synthesis to happen for people to draw inspiration from. It's something that happens organically. Like I think every artist draws from multiple sources and pulls a little bit from multiple sources, and that's sort of the driver for their own style. Certainly that's been true for me. And I think that like to see that done in a way that's a little bit more procedural, I think is really interesting. So I could see it like affecting the way that people draw inspiration in the future, or even draw from the sort of weirdness that AI creates naturally. But I don't think it would revolutionize it.
I've ever used any other AIs besides Midjourney. This is Midjourney's Discord, but I had the occasion of like talking with Bard, who writes poetry, and I love poetry, write poetry a lot. And I find from, you know, my point of view, a lot of the art, as far as Bard's ability or some AI's ability to make art, it feels like soulless, if that makes any sense. Or I know it's a vague idea, but it essentially lacks like direct inspiration from the thing that's creating the art, right? It has no compassion or relationship to it besides it's just a prompt. My worry, I guess, is that if we, like, you know, again, if you're emulating artists that had a passion, if you're emulating an AI, do you get like several degrees away from the point of origination of inspiration, right? Like if you do, you know, a sunset and you have an AI emulate a sunset, well, you know, it's a copy of a copy of a copy of a sunset instead of looking at a sunset.
I mean, if you were using, I'm doing this photo study, right? And so it's not a pure reflection of reality. It's like through the lens, literally, of a fashion photographer that has altered the image dramatically and like curated the image in a very like particular way. And so like I'm not, like I understand that I'm not studying exactly from reality, but I got to tell you, when I've done studies from AI, it's like, as somebody who's kind of sensitive to things being right or wrong in an image, I'm like, oh, this is like, doesn't feel like fruitful source material for study, because there's so many anatomical issues that are kind of subtle and don't even pop out right away. That like, I don't feel like I'm loading up my brain with like imagery that is like correct. It feels like it's potentially teaching me the wrong lessons, or maybe like leading me down false paths, or like giving me a false sense of like things like human anatomy. And so it's like, it's not super appealing to use as like straight study material. I don't see, even like people, even artists I know that are like highly interested in AI, don't use it as like straightforward study material or reference, but like maybe in the mix with other stuff. So I really doubt that there would be a like student who would be like, oh, I've always just been using AI reference for all of my studies, especially because we live in a world where there is a tremendous amount of like photographic reference at our fingertips. Like it's easier to use Google image search than it is to use Midjourney if you just want a bunch of pictures of people like in different poses and stuff. Or like it's easier to use Pinterest than it is to use Midjourney to like browse a huge number of potentially inspiring images. Like, I mean, Midjourney is really useful if you're looking for something in specific that you can't quite find, but like it's not useful as like a way of looking at thousands of images very quickly. So I don't see it replacing like study material effectively. And so I think it does have some really serious weaknesses as like a source of study material, I don't see it poisoning the well in any significant way, just because it would have to be used widely for that purpose in order to like have an influence in that way. And then if people start to go, oh yeah, actually everyone who's studied using AI reference is just marginally worse at anatomy, then every ambitious art student in the world would go like, yeah, I'm only using the good stuff. Like I'm only using the high quality stuff. Like if AI was better for a purpose like that, people would start using it for that. But like people want the best experience. They want the highest quality experience.
Right.
So
Is it so? Not to throw the prestigious artist Rob Liefeld under the bus here, but there's an entire generation of artists that have, myself included, terrible anatomy at times, right?
yeah,
And
drawing
so,
way too many pockets on all
yeah,
on all their belts.
and crazy angular feet that are super long.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I sort of wonder, and I appreciate I think
But like, wasn't there a whole generation of artists that like came out of the 90s attitude era of comics and said, I want to create something that's more anatomically correct, more grounded? Like, wasn't there like that? Rob Liefeld represents a peak of a particular movement. And then like, there's this backlash that comes specifically because Rob Liefeld's shortcomings
right.
became a kind of a running joke and no one wanted to look like that. Like, haven't we seen comics wash the other way as a result of that? Like, I don't think that Rob Liefeld started a tidal wave that has like, corrupted an entire generation of comic artists.
Oh no, certainly.
I think he's like held as a point that like now a lot of comic artists try to create a counterpoint to.
I guess more to the point of like, I remember in graphic design, and I forget what book it was a German book years ago, that talked about how the artistic acumen of like the general proletariat of the public is raised by like the most commonplace art, right? At the time of graphic design, that was like a field that was worth going into. Now, would you imagine, AI would take a lot of those jobs, like you said, just basic, you're working with some company, doing a basic layout and whatever fundamental easy logos they need. That job just disappears with AI, right?
Somebody still needs to run the AI. Like this is the question I don't feel like people have given a substantial answer to, which is, I wish that this conversation happened earlier because we're coming to the end of the stream. But somebody's got to run the AI. So if you don't hire somebody to make your logo, then you're making the logo, right? Mm-hmm. The AI doesn't do the work for you. It works as your subordinate. And so like if you it doesn't work as your subordinate, it works as your tool. So like you say like, oh well, you don't need this graphic design department because we'll just have the owner of the company do all the graphic design. Like the owner of the company doesn't want to do the graphic design. They want the art director to do all the graphic design. And that's like, okay, so is the art director's job like to do all the logo stuff and all of the other things that are their job? Like it's, you either have these specialties where people have taste and interest in these spaces, or you like consolidate it down to these super jobs where it's like you end up having somebody who wears like 20 hats. And I don't think that people who run companies want to wear more hats and like juggle through more different types of automation across a single day to be able to do all these different disciplines. Like, it's interesting to see a creative person who can say like, okay, well now with AI creating some level of automation, I'm able to create more art, or I'm able to create a wider variety of art. But they're not saying like, my boss who hates art now is the art department. Like, like he hates art for a reason. He's not wants to get, if you want to get paid the big bucks, then you don't do the work. And like running an AI is still work.
For sure. Well, I would wonder, so, and I know you're coming to a close of the stream and I appreciate your time. Is there a thought process that query-based, understanding of AI will become the new like frontier, the same way that a person that could run a printing press is the intermediary to this art resource, right? Like I'm not necessarily the artist, but I am able to manipulate the machine in such a fashion to create and crank out art.
I have definitely met people on this server that are better at creating prompts than me by like enough that I would think that they could, if there was a job for it, that they would be well suited to that job. So I think that it is possible for someone to become an expert enough in a field as like creating prompts and working with AI in order to like have that be their full-time position in a company. And maybe it's like they're going to be doing the work that would previously be done by people of other disciplines. But that doesn't reduce the total number of creative people needed on a staff. It just changes what their job titles are and what tools they're using. So I don't know.
Change the skills they're trying to hone, as opposed to like, I know that I might not have the best hand-eye coordination, but I have an ability to articulate in such a way to AI, right? It just changes what you're looking for, skill building. Right.
Yeah, it changes. So I've heard of companies that have like changed their work process away from more manual processes towards AI stuff, and people saying, "Oh, my job's disappeared." Well, not really. I mean, it just like what your job requires of you has changed, and that's a pretty rare situation that somebody had that happen to them. I think. I'm sure there's going to be some of that happening around like the graphic design world or whatever, where people or in game development, where certain assets that used to be done by an outsourcer are now insourced and being done by an art team that like works with generative tools. But it doesn't mean that like there's fewer art jobs or that the art work is less creative. Certainly it's not the boss doing the work. I think it really just comes back to like, it's a different skill set. And like, that's kind of where it's always gone. I mean, back in the day, like the way you made, a lot of people made art in graphic design was with a razor blade, and then it was like, oh, now we're just going to click on things with a mouse. Like, yes, the answer is yeah. Yeah. Everyone's throwing out their razor blades and they're picking up mice, and that's just the way it changes. And it wasn't seen as this like tectonic shift in the way that society sees itself. It was just an incremental shift in the use of technology in like specific fields. And
I have so many, I'm sorry, like, gosh, the interfacing aspect I think is the most interesting and intriguing part about how AI is shifting, because most recently University of Texas, I believe, came out with they were doing MRI scans, right, of brains, and then the AI was extrapolating the MRI data and then coming up with a comparable image based on a study of MRIs looking at those types of images. So a giraffe was then made to look like a giraffe just based on MRI scans. Do you think, so with the rapidly shifting way that the interface is, it's sort of hard, I think, as a layperson outside, to get where you should put your footing in learning? Because if I learn how to write great prompts, but then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, you need to have clear visualization skills in your mind's eye, because now AI uses your brain scan. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
Part
yeah. Everyone learned how to become really great prompt engineers. Then all of a sudden, actually, it's we're using the brainwave interface now. We're all neurolinking into our jobs.
Right.
Like,
right.
Does that disrupt it? Like, yeah. It is like I mean, there's already like automation where it's like you ask like, instead of creating a prompt directly, you're creating a meta prompt by prompting a text AI to give you prompts for image AI.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it's like, is this a matter of us learning to use the AI in this? Are we intended to like someone who's really good at like remembering a 300-word prompt? Is it like a really good prompt engineer, and then they're being replaced by somebody who has a higher level understanding of how to use a text, like a text model that is then auto-generating 300-word prompts? Like, yeah, I don't know. It's shifting really fast. I wouldn't go to college for learning to prompt an AI, not yet.
Right.
But I also know a bunch of people who are AI native artists, and they spend an insane amount of time like experimenting, building projects, trying out new technology, like and then like trying to merge and combine techniques that they're learning about online. Like the people who are at the cutting edge of this thing, as far as I can tell, don't sleep and haven't slept in the last 12 months. And they're just like constantly trying out like the latest technology that's coming in that day. And they're trying out all these new ways of working and experimenting with new hardware and software all the time. And then, and so if you want to call them an expert, I think it's fair to call them an expert. Like they are building a depth of knowledge and a level of expertise that is unmatched by people who are just picking up the thing for the first time and fucking around with it.
It feels different. Like a person that's good at writing calligraphy can still get a job, but if they move the metrics so quickly that you're not using that, you know what I mean? Like it's a skill set that might quickly disappear is the only thing that I think is sort of worried, right? Even if you're aware of the value of the skill.
Well, that's what I'm saying is I don't think it's a skill set yet. I think it's like an interest set. It's like, early on in computing, like my dad was he's a software developer, recently retired. And when he got into it, he was coming into it as a math major, right? Using punch cards. Right. When you were programming a computer with punch cards, it was like, yeah, somebody who was really good at that was somebody who was really good at carefully handling a lot of punch cards so that they never got them out of order. Like, does that make you does becoming a good computer programmer have something to do with your ability to handle paper? Or is it about understanding the underlying logic of how a computer reads instructions, like the flow of logic, like figuring out what is the skill of computer programming during the 1970s was like a challenge that was like, it was an open question. What does it mean to be a good programmer is something that is still debated among software developers. Like, what is the core skill set that defines a good programmer from a bad programmer? What defines a skill set? What's the skill set that defines a good artist from a bad artist? Very open question, very open to interpretation, and different answers depending on what you value and what industry you're in, all kinds of stuff. So if you're going to ask like, okay, well, what makes a good prompt engineer? Is that a thing that people are going to value? I think that working with AI technology is a skill set, but it's like a suite of skills. It's not like learning to write prompts and then we're going to now do it with brainwaves. I think that the people who are experts in this field right now are curious people who are working with technology in more of a holistic fashion and understanding the underlying way in which it works and have a large amount of exposure to different technologies in the space. And they're not necessarily somebody who's just like drilled down and got really good at like, I'm good at typing in messages into Discord.
Gotcha.
There is a broader set of skills at play for somebody who's an AI expert rather than just prompt engineering. And I think as like this field continues to mature, I think we're going to see that more clearly.
Yeah, I could ask you a ton more questions about like Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, and the dealing with specialization as an economic model, but
that's getting outside of my level of expertise. I know I'm talking smart and whatnot, but I don't know everything about everything. I don't know. I think there is a future for AI stuff in the world, in business, in creativity, in fine art, in commercial art, in all the places. I don't think it replaces what we have now, as like holistically replaces the idea of like people pushing pixels around or paint around with a brush the way I'm showing here. This is here to stay, guarantee it. And like this underlying creative thinking behind the creative process, whether it's in music or photography, art, dance, all of it, AI is not making a significant dent in the human pursuit of creating art. It is a technology that exists as an adjunct to that process, the same as every other creative technology. And I think that it's really caught us off guard because we live at a moment where we've gotten kind of used to technology being basically the same as it was yesterday, with like the phones just being slightly larger and slightly faster year over year. And now have seen like a new technology for the first time in a while that is like a pretty big shift. And the adoption rate has been insanely fast. So it's like, But I also think some of it's just marketing. I think that some of the existential terror that people are experiencing right now is being fueled by people like fucking Sam Altman talking like psychos in public spaces in a way that's intended. It's not intended to be fully authentic. It's marketing. Like a lot of these, like people like Elon Musk and Sam Altman are like doing marketing when they're talking about AI taking over the world. They want to express how powerful this technology is in this like existential way, rather than seeing it as a tool set that exists on a very, in a very specific, in very small sectors that like, target very specific industries and like, it's an interesting systemic technology, but it's not I don't think it's an existential technology personally. And I think that lots of the people that are out there saying that the loudest have an invested interest in making sure that that's the way people think about it.
Okay. No, yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. And the distribution, again, talking about the distribution of wealth, if you have a series of systems that are set up that AI would sort of subvert the necessity of the industries that you currently participate in, obviously you have an agenda to work against that. But and again, so regardless of any of that, thanks again. It was a pleasure. I know I've probably been holding you, or it seems like you're taking extra time.
Yeah, you're holding Ancient Chaos more than you're holding me. We're together are currently holding him hostage. Thank you, Ancient Chaos, for administrating this thing. As always, I really appreciate it. And thank you everyone who showed up. I love all you guys for coming here and having interest in my work. And if you want to hang out and see more of me, I'm streaming just about every day on Twitch at twitch.tv/Pete Mohrbacher. I do it from my Discord server, Huckleberry Art Academy. You can find a link in my bio, and also go to huckleberry.art. And maybe I'll see you around. Worst case scenario, I'll be back here next week. I do this every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.